Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Eliminating poverty must be central to the work in this place. Many in Labor are looking for what will be our shared driving force over the next 3 years, given the decision of the Australian people in May. Anthony Albanese, the Leader of the Opposition, rightly said, Labor's policies may change, but our values do not. Those values of opportunity, fairness, equality mean nothing if in this place, in this term, we do nothing to address the huge poverty challenges that this country faces. Poverty alleviation is a cause which carries from Labor's earliest roots in the traditional pre-Federation trade union movement through to one of the first policy achievements of the Labor government, the age pension. This cause solidifies Labor's unique position as an intervener with purpose in the market economy. It was this view and these values which led us to extend the pension to women in 1908 and to increase the pension a century later under Prime Minister Rudd. In our public debate, Australians have talked much of inequality, but these conversations far too often focus on redistribution. In recent times, they've led to conversations about people who are perceived to have too much, rather than where our focus should be, which is those who do not have enough to survive. I'm always fond of this quote from John Curtin, which he made during one of his campaign launches, where he said on August 28, 1940, Labor is a peace-loving party. Its struggle has always been on behalf of the weak against the strong, for the poor, for those who have never had a chance. And I think as we think about some of the debates we have in this place around economic policy, it's worth remembering who it is that we're actually here to serve. In Australia, there are simply too many people who do not have enough to get by. The Australian Council of Social Services estimates there are some 3 million Australians who live below the poverty line. This is a dramatic figure. 3 million of our fellow Australians without enough to have what we would call that basic experience of being able to fully participate in our society. This has a worse impact than anywhere else when it comes to our schools. The Smith family calculates there are some 1.1 million children living in households below the poverty line. 1.1 million children whose families cannot provide the basics and the essentials for them to perform their absolute best during their schooling years. It's a shocking statistic that Foodbank has partnered with 500 New South Wales government schools to provide free breakfasts for children who would otherwise go without. When it comes to the poverty debate, some will say that Bob Hawke's famous campaign pledge that, quote, by 1990 no Australian child will be living in poverty, set the cause of poverty eradication back. I disagree. There is nothing wrong with having big policy goals and an aspiration for a greater Australia, especially when their policy goals cannot be achieved by one single policy, one single payment or one single legislative measure. Indeed, as this year we celebrated Bob Hawke's life, it became clearer and clearer that the policies that he stitched together indeed did lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. We've also got to avoid the trap of fighting social causes and economic causes separately. The reality is the best social policy is also economic policy. True of paid parental leave, true of the Modern Slavery Act, a great achievement of the current government, and true of the Equal Opportunity Act, to name just 3. Each of them lifted people out of poverty and were concrete steps towards avoiding a working poor in Australia. Australians expect us to put the voters first. That means talking about people, their lived experience, and not just of institutions, mechanisms and payments. It means engaging with the most vulnerable Australians, ensuring government support is at a sufficient level, and it means doing basic things that make those essential building blocks available for all, such as making childcare affordable for all Australians and accessible for all children. It means taking action on the pain caused by inadequate unemployment support. I believe this is one of the most pressing tasks of the 46th Parliament. Unemployment whatever your political persuasions, unemployment is a cost to society. It costs society in lost tax revenue. It costs us in lost productive labour. And most importantly, it costs us in terms of lost hope for a person who's unable to fulfil their potential. The calls for a New Start to increase will continue to become louder and louder until they become unavoidable for whoever is in government. But we should also make sure that when New Start reform is finally achieved, the one-payment-fits-all approach is put in the bin for good. We should make sure that these payments actually achieve their stated policy goal. If our policy goal is to make sure that people have a decent standard of living when they cannot get a job, then, by logic, New Start is too low because people cannot have a decent standard of living when they are unable to find employment. And then, for those who are even less fortunate, the first step for some in lifting them out of poverty is to make sure they simply have a roof to sleep under. In my state of Western Australia, the sluggish economy has meant more and more Western Australians are experiencing homelessness. Data recently released shows that in 2017-18, specialist homelessness services in Western Australia assisted some 23,739 people over that year. 23,739 Western Australians relying on services because they did not have somewhere to call home. That makes the more quoted statistic of some 9,000 people experiencing homelessness on census night show that we really do have a huge problem in Western Australia when it comes to homelessness. I recently visited Tom Fisher House, run by St Vincent de Paul. St Vinny's do an amazing job both in their fundraising and in their purpose-based community work. And I visited with Shadow Housing and Homelessness Minister, the member for Blaxland. These people are at the coalface of homelessness. Their services are full every single night. We can't just put a positive spin when it comes to homelessness. We need to make sure there is funding for the sort of services that we've seen in this place actually make a difference. One of them is the Common Ground model. It's been a success in Brisbane. It's been a success in many other states. Unfortunately, during the global financial crisis, funding was not provided for Western Australia to receive one of those services. I believe it is time that the federal government now funds that service in Western Australia. When we talk about the language, as we've just done, about the appropriations and the budgets in which we deal with in this place, we often talk about our budget, and I hear this far too often where people talk about our budget will do this, our budget will do that. It's not an abstract thing that is owned by someone. It is actually the community's aspirations represented in a government document. It's the same when we talk about inequality, rather than discussing the very real human impacts of living below the poverty line. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is one example where we actually talked about lifting people out of poverty in a way that truly transformed people's lives. It was about lifting those families and those individuals living with disability out of poverty, some for the first time. It has been an amazing achievement and one of those things that will last in this country longer than any of us will serve in this place. On the Labor side, we've always fought for those who do not have the circumstances or means or power to protect their own circumstances or their own economic situation. It's one of the reasons I'm a strong supporter of Australia's foreign aid target of 0.5% of gross national income becoming the standard by which we measure whether or not we are doing our bit as good international citizens across the world. Lifting people out of poverty has driven some of the greatest Australians to serve in this parliament. John Curtin, you cannot read one speech of his where he doesn't talk passionately, clearly about lifting Australians out of poverty and building a society where poverty does not exist. Even in the depths of World War II, it was his single focus about the sort of country he wanted to build at the conclusion of that war. In the face of that war, he was able to increase pensions twice in just 5 years. And for the first time, with federal government funds, they were able to fund creches for women who had entered the workforce for the first time. This is a complex policy area. There are no simple solutions, but there is no one single policy, but a stitching together of many policies that will hopefully allow all of us in this place to achieve our goal of lifting our fellow Australians out of poverty.